Hi, mystery writers. Welcome. Today I wanted to talk about subplots, a little bit about subplots and getting them into your story because they can add a lot to your story. And I'm going to do the theory, and then I want to talk, just to share a little bit about what happens with me with subplots. So you can really amp up your novel with a subplot. You can add depth and emotional connection to your readers with a subplot. And you'll deepen your story and expand insight into your characters. And as a story device, a subplot expands the story beyond the main storyline. So, what is a subplot? A subplot is a story strand that supports and runs alongside of your main plot. It's like a mini story within your main story, and it too has a beginning, middle, and end. The subplot story augments the main story through connections like mirroring the main plot, but without the drastic consequences or contrasting the main story by showing success where the main storyline throws up obstacles. The subplot is not a separate story. That would be a different novel, right? But it connects to the main story in some manner, like time or place, and often with thematic significance. It may echo or amplify the theme of your story. As also, subplots connect to the main story at least one time in the storyline. Supporting characters can play a major role in subplots, not just the main protagonist or the antagonist. The subplot is also shorter than the main story. It takes up less space in your story, and the events in the subplot are less significant than those in the main story and involve supporting characters. So how does it work in your novel? You can use subplots to expand your story with details and characters and story sequences that are not directly part of the main storyline. So in mystery novel, for example, the subplot may involve love interest or a supporting character having a goal and either achieving it or not. Subplots work best with planning, and to make subplots work effectively, you want to create a separate story arc with the characters involved in that subplot. Remember, you're like creating a mini story. There's a little story that's planted inside your main story, and you definitely want to tie the subplot to the main story in at least one or more points, so that they do intersect at some point. They don't just run parallel, they actually intersect at various points in your story. When you brainstorm for ideas for subplots, you want to keep in mind how the subplot is going to support the main story. It can mirror or support a central character, such as the protagonist or the antagonist. It can provide backstory for the main storyline. It can explore a story theme at a different level than the main story. It can create complications for the main storyline, affecting the central action. And it can expand the story world with details. So there's lots of different things you can do with a subplot. Novel writing site Now Novel recommends 3 main attributes to create tension with subplots: romantic interest, conflict, and supporting characters who know too much. Creating tension is one of the best ways to keep readers engaged and turning pages. So you definitely want to raise questions in your subplot storyline the same way you raise questions in your main storyline. Subplots that work well enhance your story rather than taking readers away from the story. So you want to design the subplot so it enriches your reader's experience while keeping them focused on the main story. Your subplot needs to influence the main storyline, or it shouldn't be there at all. And I have to agree, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my personal experience with subplots. So why have a subplot? If a subplot is all the work of creating a story, you may wonder why bother? Because you want to create a story, and that work is hard, so why add more work? I think this is especially true for beginning writers. First of all, the subplot adds substance. A subplot makes your story meatier and gives your readers more excitement and more character knowledge. And a subplot also can expand your protagonist and make them more likable. So you give your reader a well-rounded look at the protagonist. The more the reader knows, the more they care about your hero, and they will like her and relate to him better. And these are the very reader's emotions that make them root for your hero as he tackles the main story problem. The other thing a subplot can do is inject variety into your story. So depending on your theme, the main story may be packed with adventure or action. Your subplot can vary the mood by adding humor or romance to your mystery. And subplots provide the reader relief from the main emotions and give them new reading avenues to explore your story. So what you're doing is you're engaging your reader more at an emotional level by adding these stories that help them connect with characters in your story. So that helps the reader care more about the characters, so that the stakes, as it were, in the main storyline are even more important to the reader at an emotional level. They can also increase the story length. So one of the things that subplots can do is, rather than try to make your main story longer by adding and adding and adding with filler content, the subplots make your story longer by adding a whole new story element to the main plot, and your readers will keep turning those pages. The other thing subplots do, is they promote the story theme. So a subplot can mirror and enhance the theme of your story. And as you know, our main theme in mysteries is discovering the truth and revealing the truth. So if your heroine ready to fight the evil, give her a subplot where she and her dad don't get along, and not only that, he supports the evil she's trying to conquer. You've given your readers more meat to chew on and developed your heroine's character and underscored your theme, all with one subplot. Another thing that subplots do is they make your story realistic. So real life doesn't go in a straight line, and subplots and their complications will make your story feel more realistic. Your heroine doesn't just take on the evil. She has to deal with her overbearing dad, and maybe she finds a love interest. And the more realistic complications, the more intriguing your readers will find your story. So subplots add that dimension to your story. When you add a subplot dimension, your main character becomes more realistic as they juggle those various challenges. And your character also becomes much more relatable to your reader, because readers don't just have one problem in their life either. They do have complicated lives as well, so they're going to understand all these complications that happen in your story. Let's take a look at some subplot mistakes to avoid. Subplots need your attention as a writer to make them realistic and keep readers turning pages. If this is your first novel and your first time creating subplots, here are some pitfalls to avoid. A boring mini story. If you go to all the work of creating a subplot, make sure you give it the attention and detail that goes into any good story. Don't just add a subplot because you think you need one. Give it punch. Another thing is you don't want to leave any threads dangling, so you want to resolve the subplot story. Remember, the subplot story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, so you want to make sure you bring it to a conclusion. It has a climax and a resolution, and they're just not as grand as the main story. Without resolution, your readers will feel cheated, not just about the subplot, but about the whole novel. So you want to make sure you do that. Another thing to avoid is to avoid overcomplicating the subplot. Too many subplots will confuse your reader, and it takes them away from that main storyline, so you really don't want to do that. And so make your subplots relatable, entertaining, and related to the main plot. And you're going to create interest and keep your readers involved. So somebody gave me a thumbs up, so thank you. I don't know who that is. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens with me with subplots and planning. Okay, I just recommended planning. When I go through my first planning stages, I plan a subplot, and I usually plan 2. But what I find as I am writing, or as I get deeper into the story, is one of those subplots dies on the vine. If it's just me, I'm just sharing what happens with me, my experience. But what happens instead is, as I am writing the story, a new subplot emerges. This just happened with the story I'm editing. I'm in final edits right now with my story, The Grain Merchant, and I started out with a subplot, and I had places to put it in the story, and that subplot was about slavery. My story's set in 6th century Italy, so slaves are just part of life, and I wanted to explore that a little more. But what happened was, it felt to me like it was getting heavy, and it was, instead of adding to the story, it was detracting from the story. It was like, this story is a mystery, and we've got to solve this puzzle, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, slavery, and da-da-da. And so I let it go. I just let it go. But in the course of the story, something I hadn't planned happened, and it became a whole new subplot about relationships, about friendship, and the difference between friendship and love interest, and how those can be reconciled. And so I was much happier with that subplot. But I just wanted to share that because subplots, just like your main plot, are subject to change. Nothing is cast in stone. If you start out with a subplot and feel that it's taking away from your story, or at least not even adding to your story, just let it go. Um, and you're going to be much happier. Remember, all of this stuff that I say, they're guidelines. But nothing is cast in stone. And I'm saying this for the beginning writers because we have quite a few in our group. And I think if you concentrate on your story and work with your story, and go into your story and bring your characters alive, your characters are going to tell you what comes next, and or how this subplot isn't really working for your story and you need to go over here instead of where you thought you were going. So listen to your story, pay attention to your story, have fun with the subplots because they are a lot of fun to do, and they do provide more depth to your story, without you having to belabor and belabor and belabor your main story. You you get to tell these other stories that go along, um, with your story and intersect with the story, so they actually impact what happens in your main story. Okay, I hope that helps. Please, if you have any questions, um, leave them in the comments. And also, I'd love it if you would share your experience with working with subplots. They really help stories, and at the same time, they're fun to work with, and at the same time, they can be challenging. So I'd love to hear how you approach subplots and what you do with them. Okay, thank you so much, and keep writing.